All right. Good to see everybody. Glad to be here. David G., alcoholic addict of many sorts. Grateful for a recovery date of August 8th, 1994 in Alcoholics Anonymous and October 1st, 2019 in SA as a fellowship. Very grateful to be here tonight with you guys. Ashley, thank you so much for your service as always. And Dennis, you guys always go above and beyond. Without you guys, this study would not be possible. And I like to say that every time I start because it is the truth for one thing. And another thing is, they have made it to where we can connect with countries all over the world. I want to thank the Bali Book It group. Am I saying that right, Anushka? Okay. Yes. All right. Good deal. For first, even coming up with the idea for us to do this study. We've been, many, many weeks now. What, about 32, Dennis, somewhere in there? And so we have traveled a long way through the book. And we're all the way up to the family afterwards. And, as I've said before, we call these the lost chapters in Alcoholics Anonymous because I don't know about where you come from in your fellowship, but where I came from, we didn't really read this a whole lot. And we most definitely didn't study it, not the way that we do today. And there's so much good information in here. For a long time, I really didn't know what that meant, the family afterward. I mean, the family after we finished drinking, well, most of us on here have been sober for a long while, but still have some trouble in the family. Or am I just the only one? I'm not sure here, but yeah, it's this is other areas of life and ways to live after the spiritual experience has taken place in chapter 7. So, we finished up to the wives. What a powerful chapter that was. There were so many principles laid out there and things that we could take a good look at. It'll be no different here. We will look at this in depth. We will take a good, thorough look at it and study it. I always like to say that I've been doing these book studies for a long, long time. I was blessed to have Joe and Charlie as one of my first sponsors in the program. Charlie taught me the book in a way that was just unbelievable. But I've had a lot of other people that have helped me through the years. And, when I went through this process in 2019 again, was the first time that a man had ever taken me all the way through the book to page 164. And I was just amazed at the stuff that I had read so many times but missed just with the naked eye by not looking and studying it. So tonight we want to jump into this. We want to take a little deeper dive and look. We've talked so long now about how self is what had defeated us. Now, the common manifestations of self are resentment, fear, the pride, the lust, all this other stuff. And a lot of the behaviors that we're here for and in trouble because of, sober or drunk, has to do with that very reason. So we're going to look at how even after having a spiritual experience, it's easy to get caught up into that in this part of the book. The good thing about this study and most studies and fellowships that I go to, there's not a lot of judgment there. Now, I did find some in Alcoholics Anonymous because of my behavior and the way that I acted there in 2018, 2019. But, I don't feel that I'm a victim of that today. For so long, I was very resentful over that. But as I look at that today, I see what was to blame. I see who took the actions based on self and produced a result. So I'm not going to go into that too much. We're going to jump into the book and go with it tonight. And we're going to look at the family after the spiritual experience, the family afterward. Our women folk have suggested a certain attitude that a wife may take with a husband who is recovering. See, it doesn't say anything about drinking there. We're talking about now that we are recovering. Perhaps they've created the impression. Now, for me, when I look at this sentence, I don't really so much look at they are the ones that created this impression. Self seems to create those impressions for us. That he is to be wrapped in cotton wool, placed on a pedestal. But successful readjustment means just the opposite. So we see that successful readjustment of the spirit means completely the opposite of wrapping someone in cotton wool, placing them on a pedestal. Oh, my husband's sober now. My wife, she's doing so well, this, which is all good. I'm not saying that we shouldn't give attaboys and pats on the backs, but whenever, that gets to be too much, I don't know about for you guys, but for a guy like me, that can become pretty dangerous because that gets to my head pretty quick of something that I have done rather than what God has done for me. So all members of the family should meet up on the common ground of, now look at these fruits of the Spirit: tolerance, understanding, and love. See, that's what I want to look for. That's what I'm shooting for in my everyday life here, with my wife, with my coworkers, with, the world at large, my brothers and sisters in recovery. But there's a condition. And this next sentence is this involves a process of deflation. Deflation of what? Of self. How do we do that? Well, obviously, steps 4 through 9. Without 1, 2, 3, it's not possible. But without steps 4 through 9, I will never be able to deflate the ego, especially in 4, 5, and 9. Seems to be really, the key steps right there to continue to deflate the ego. The alcoholic, his wife, his children, his in-laws, each one is likely to have, look at these key words, fixed ideas about the family's attitude toward himself or herself. Now, anytime we do that, we know that something other than us is driving us with those ideas. And that's going to cause us to take action that's going to leave some kind of harm some way. Each is interested in having his wishes respected. I see the selfishness there. If I break that sentence out and I really look at that, I see the selfishness behind that. We find the more that one family member demands that the others concede to him, there I see the inconsideration, the dishonesties. The book says the more resentful that they become. Why? Because my demands can never be met. Self will never be satisfied with any of that. So whenever the self is not satisfied, and I don't know any of this is going on within me, it's almost like I'm in the middle and I'm being pulled between two worlds, and I'm not, but this is the only one I ever known. But now if I'm dealing with someone who is an alcoholic or an addict, and my sons were a prime example of this, then I can become very resentful and get sick, even though I've got this many years in recovery. And I have all of this experience and knowledge about this. I can still find myself in a bad place if I'm not very careful. This makes for discord and unhappiness. And why? Is it not because each one wants to play the lead? Remember on page 62 of our book, and we'll just travel there real quick. I don't want to get hung up on this too much tonight. But on page 62 of our book, at the bottom paragraph, it says this, page 62. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. It's not that I don't enjoy doing it. It's just that it doesn't work. Now, there's really like 4 things that I want to keep an eye on when I'm in this part of the book or working with a new guy. Now, here's how self manifests for me. I find myself a victim. I find myself a scorekeeper. Well, I've done this and she didn't do that. I mean, here I come in the afternoons. I do all this. She don't really do a whole lot of anything. And that's all a lie, for one thing. But I find myself keeping score. I find myself as a judge, jury, and executioner. I can already have someone tried and hung before the day is out in my mind. And I'm the noticer. I want to notice what's been done, what hasn't been done. People across the yard don't ever mow their yard the way that they should. I'm just always in that state of mind. And over here, back where we were at, it says it's no different here with the family. Each one wants to play the lead. Is not each trying to arrange the family show to his liking? Now, remember on page 60 to 63, we talked a lot about that guy. Forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. But here's the key to it. Is he not unconsciously trying to see what he can take from the family? I don't even really know I'm doing this. Someone will eventually point it out to me, and then I'm going to get upset and challenge you and get into an argument and become very bitter. But at some point, I'm going to step back and say, wait a minute. They're probably right. So unconsciously, I don't even know I'm doing this. And if you remember at the bottom of page 53 of our book, and we agnostics, the very bottom paragraph on page 53, it says that was natural, but let us think a little more closely about it. Now look at these key 3 words. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith. I always thought that was talking about faith in God. But without knowing it, I've been brought to where I stood by a certain kind of faith because I've had faith in self. And I don't even really know that's going on with me. So if I don't know that's going on, and I have a spiritual experience, how could I expect that the family would know that's what was going on too? They unconsciously, they don't realize that either. Each one is trying to see what he can take from the family rather than to give. And then on page 128 in this very chapter, we're going to look at a very key principle coming up here soon. And it says giving rather than getting will become our guiding principle. That's a pretty tough principle to live up to sometimes, but it's okay. You know, we do the best we can. We learn from our mistakes and we move on. And so cessation of drinking is but the first step away from a highly strained abnormal condition. And we're talking about the mind. A doctor said to us, years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make a wife or a child neurotic. The entire family is to some extent ill. Now we hear it called a family illness a lot, and I believe that. I can remember running around the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous talking about coming from an abnormal family, and I can remember Charlie pulling me to the side and he said, the only thing abnormal about your family is you was in it. So I won't hear you talking like that no more about your family unless they're here to defend themselves. And so, you know, I backed away from that. It doesn't matter whether they were ill or it was dysfunctional or what it was. Their families realize that as they start their journeys, let families realize as they start their journey that not all will be fair weather. Each in his turn may be footsore and straggle. We get a little hurt feelings sometimes, a lot at times. There will be alluring shortcuts and bypass down by which they may wander and lose their way. My grand sponsor tells the story of his sponsor. And he's Native American, so after he had this experience through the steps, he took the experience back to the Native community. And so his sponsor was a man that walked on a cane, a very devout Catholic, but he was also Native American and practiced the ways. And so he took his cane and he drew a long line, probably 20, 30 foot in the sand, just a straight line in the dirt. And he told my grand sponsor, he said, walk that straight line. And so he'd walk and this guy'd come around behind him and just push him off the side. He'd shake his head a little bit. He'd get back on the path. He'd walk a little way. He'd come to the other side and push him off. And he did this all the way up that line. Well, you know, the grand sponsor said he's getting pretty irritated and a little red about this. After a while, he's had about enough. But when they get to the end, he tells him, he says, turn around and look at that straight line. He said, you see, you seem to think that that's the straight path. It's that straight line. But the places that I pushed you off and you come back on and I pushed you off and you come back on, that's the path. That's the straight line of the path. Is the times you fall off and the times you come back. It's not how many times you fall off. It's how many times you come back. And so I've never forgot that. Even though we wander and lose our way, whether this be mental or whatever it may be, we got a chance to come back here. And we got a chance to pick up on 10, 11, get back into our meetings, start going through this process, working with other people. Everybody is going to have some trouble here. They just are. I mean, we're human beings. So the book says, suppose we tell you some of the obstacles we will meet. Well, hey, I'm definitely interested in that. Now, remember on page 72 of the book, this already gave us a bird's eye view of that, way back over there. It said, this is when we started into our fifth step work. Having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? We've been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our creators, and discover the obstacles in our path. Because once I discover that, it's no longer about you. It's about me now. It's about fear. It's about resentment. It's about shame, guilt, worry, remorse. Hell has many mansions too, don't it? So suppose we tell you some of the obstacles, back to 123, that we will meet, and suppose we suggest how they may be avoided, even converted into good use for others. That's the best thing about our past, is we get to use it now to help others. And as we go along, we get to learn and turn and help others with that. If we don't, we hang on to that. We get into self-pity. That leads us right back into our illness. So the family of the alcoholic longs for the return of happiness and security. Of course we do. They remember when Father was romantic, thoughtful, and successful. Today's life is measured against that of other years, and when it falls short, the family may be unhappy. I'm pretty sure it's not that they may be, it's that they're going to be. So family confidence in dad is rising high. That's not a good thing unless we begin to put expectations on him or her that they can't meet. The good old days will be back soon. That's one of the obstacles they talked about up there at the top of the page. Suppose we tell you some of the obstacles. Here's one of them. I don't think we do that. So the good old days will soon be back. Look at these two words. They think. I'm not so sure it's them doing this type of thinking, but they're being driven by a system of thought that produces that kind of thinking. The bad news is we usually take actions based on those thoughts, and it creates a reality that he's not going to be able to live up to, or she's not going to be able to live up to. And the next thing you know, there's going to be a lot of resentment. I bet you everybody on this call tonight has many stories that they could share about that. Sometimes they demand. There's another one of those obstacles we've seen from the top of the page, that dad bring them back instantly. It's, by God, it's, you've done this for so long. I got a good friend that lives not too far from me. Oh my God, it took forever for this guy to sober up. I mean, forever, years and years and years and years. But he finally got sober. And when he did, he had a outright spiritual experience that was life-changing, and he really became an asset to the program, and he really began to right his wrongs and do what we do here. He had that transformation. Well, at that point, his wife kind of went into seclusion. She let her health go. She got really depressed, and she got real bad. And it was almost like she demanded that, he brought this back instantly. But as time has went on, she has really deteriorated into almost nothing. And now he's the one who is the caretaker and is on the other side of that. It's really a sad story. It really is. So the mind is very powerful. God, they believe, owes them this recompense on a long do-over count. Now, anytime I see those two words, they believe, God, they believe. And I'm not so sure it's they that believe it. I believe that system of thought is driven by self. I won't ever not believe that now. And whenever I believe something like that, that thought's always coupled with what that next line says, almost owes this recompense to a long overdue account. My God, when I believe something like that, I mean, we're headed for bad trouble or a mental headache for sure. But the head of the house has spent years pulling the structures of business, romance, friendship, and health. These things are now ruined or damaged. And that's talking about what self has done in my life and the life of my family prior to coming in here. And in my case, even after being in here for a long time, because lust came and got me. And I followed that all the way to the very end of the road. And man, it tore down romance, friendships, health. I mean, I was in a bad way in 2019 with 25 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous, free from alcohol and drugs. Very easy to get caught up in this. It says it will take time to clear away the wreck. It's taken a long time to make all those amends. It really has. And I'm still in the process of making the last one now. But it's here's what happened. The old buildings will eventually be replaced by finer ones. Today, I have a better structure of life than I ever had before in all of those 25 years. And my life wasn't bad other than with the lust and the acting out. It has been replaced by finer ones. The new structures will take years to complete. We're still in that process of completion. So Father knows he is to blame. He knows it. And I mean, it's kind of like Jim, and he knew he was going to lose his family. He knew, that he was going back to jail or the asylum, whatever it was. He knew all of these things. And I think with me, at least, when this sentence here, Father knows he is to blame. When I came in 2019 and I accepted, I finally quit trying to go around and hide everything. I quit trying to justify, minimize, and rationalize my behavior, and quit trying to push it off on everybody else. There were some things that I absolutely did not do. But I didn't try to say, you know what, that's BS, and before I would have argued that to the end, I just said, you know what, I'm to blame. No matter what, I'm to blame. And when I did that, I began to get better. It says it may take him many seasons of hard work, and that's something that most addicts and alcoholics are not used to. Now, people tell me, yeah, I could get out there and swing a hammer with you all day long. Yeah, pick up a pen and write with me. Let's get into some inventory. Let's see how hard of a worker you are there, buddy. Because I tell you, we're talking about another kind of work. And it's going to deflate something that's inside of here. And I promise that's not an easy process. The mind self will fight that to the very end, or it does with most of the people that I've seen. So there's going to be many seasons of hard work to be restored financially. But he shouldn't be reproached, and that's, to express disapproval. Anytime that I'm working real hard and I'm trying real hard and I feel like somebody disapproves of something I've done, whether it be my wife, my mother, boy, that's a fine example there. That story could go on forever. But, it's just almost like a pull within. I feel that tightness. I start getting a little angry, and I don't always use our 10 steps in that moment like I should. And a lot of times I won't act on that, but what happens is I will stay burned up on the inside until I do. I have to clean that up on the daily. I have to. So perhaps he will never have much money again, but the wise family will admire him for what he's trying to do rather than for what he's trying to get. We either trust God here or we don't. It keeps coming back to that over and over and over. Every chapter so far, it keeps coming back to that. We either trust God or we don't. So now and then the family will be plagued by specters from the past. For the drinking career of almost every alcoholic has been marked by escapades, funny, humiliating, shameful, or tragic. And as sex addicts, those of us that are sex addicts on this call, we definitely know that our past has been marked by those kinds of things. Man, we could tell stories forever. I just don't like to get into a lot of stories other than the story of how many thousand men and women have recovered. So it says the first impulse will be to bury these skeletons in the closet and padlock the door. I can remember I would not stand at the podium and tell anything about sexaholism. When I was first invited back to speak at a conference after 3 years of being absent from Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'd been in Sexaholics Anonymous all that time. Well, it wasn't quite 3 years. I think it might have been 2. So my sponsor calls me up and he says, I want you to speak at a conference in Cedar Rapids, Iowa for Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, no way, man. Mm-mm. And he said, I see that you're probably taking that as I'm asking a question, but I'm not. And I was like, man, I don't know how to tell my story anymore because everything I've ever told for years has been pretty much a lie, and you know it. And he said, well, now you have a chance to clean that up and do something different. And I said, I'm telling you, I don't know how to tell my story there. I just don't. And he said, I think you're going to need to trust God. We'll see you then. And so I come back, and man, I was so nervous that day. I can remember, getting up there. And instead of doing what I would have always done is what we just now read right here. My first impulse was to bury those skeletons dark in a closet, put a padlock on that door, and get away from that and just talk about what I always talked about. But for some reason, if you look at those next 6 or 8 words at the end of that page, it said the family may be possessed by the idea. I was possessed by the idea that I was going to tell the truth. And I went about it in a way that wasn't out of character. It wasn't ugly and nasty and bitter. But I told what happened to me and what I'd done in Alcoholics Anonymous. And people found that very favorably. I can remember people coming from everywhere wanting to know how to get help for sex addiction in Alcoholics Anonymous. I started getting invited to speak at a lot of places for AA again. I did a few of them. I turned the rest down. But we don't have to bury those things in the closet no more. We've dealt with that stuff. I don't need to come out and tell all this graphic, horrific stuff. But if I can talk about this in a general way, I'm going to help more people than I ever could have if I would have buried and shut this up because I didn't want to feel shameful. So, food for thought. The family may be possessed by the idea. Now, anytime I'm possessed by an idea, if it's not of the spirit, it's of the self. And if I'm possessed by that idea, that's going to be an ugly outcome. So remember the top of the page. Suppose we tell you some of the obstacles a family will meet. Well, here's another one. We're possessed by the idea that future happiness can be based only upon forgetfulness of the past. That's a false idea. The past, as we will see here in a minute, is the greatest asset that you and I have today, no matter how dirty, no matter how shameful. It's not so much about what I've done, but what am I doing to walk in the future now, using the past as an asset to help my brothers and sisters. I mean, that's what I'm more focused on today, because my thinking is in a different place. I don't think like I once did. Now look at what he says. We think that such a view is self-centered. I'm still spiritually asleep when that kind of a view is going on with me. I'm driven to believe something by a narrative that lives in my head, and I call that self, and I buy into that story, and I think about that story a little bit, and I think, my God, you know, they are after me, and they don't want the best for me, and I'll straighten them out. I promise you, I'll straighten them out. And I start rolling down that path, and the next thing you know, I'm doing all kinds of stupid stuff. I'm saying things to people I shouldn't be saying, like my boss, for God's sake, and no telling who else. And the next thing you know, I'm, like it says right here, I'm in direct conflict with the new way of living. Well, we can either stay in that and get sucked into it, or we can use the tools that we have here, admit our wrongs, turn our thoughts to helping somebody else. And man, it turns out to be a good deal, because I've learned. I love this paragraph right here. Henry Ford once made a wise remark to the effect that experience, not knowledge, experience is the thing of supreme value in life. Now, knowledge is a very good thing to have, but me knowing something does not produce an experience, and I know that. Now, that is true only if one is willing, and I think that's the key to it, is our willingness to turn the past to good account. That's the only thing it's good for now. We grow by our willingness to face and rectify our errors and convert them into assets. We know that those are steps 4 through 9. Through this process, we know that looking at steps 4 through 9 will allow us to face, rectify those errors, and convert them into assets by the work that we do in steps 8 and 9. So the alcoholic's past thus becomes the principal asset of the family, and frequently it is almost the only one. So from the mindset of before, that nobody can know this because all of the dirty and shameful things that will come to us and to our families, that's not true. This becomes our principal asset. What a beautiful way. I had a sponsor that said it like this one time. I was running around, I was in a meeting, I was saying, well, there's nothing, you know, can't change anything about the past, can't change anything about the past. And he spoke up. He said, I'm going to tell you that there is something we can do about our past. And I said, really? He said, the only thing that we can do about our past is change the way we feel about it right now. And I thought, wow, how powerful was that? I never thought that I could do anything about my past, but I can change the way I feel about it right now. I'm not dirty and guilty and all that crap anymore that rolled through my head on the daily, even after sobering up for a long time. I don't live with that anymore. I just don't, because I've changed that with God's help. The painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problem. I love that. No matter how painful that is, I'm going to tell stories that I don't want to tell, but somebody's going to get a little hope from that their husband, their son, their wife, or whatever, they will have a chance. We think each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not, and I believe that with all my heart. That is not only our obligation, it is our responsibility to go back and help our brothers and sisters that have not found a way out yet. And when the occasion requires, each member of it, look at this closely, should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. Where do they hide? They hide in the mind. They hide within the being. And they just hold on to us because we don't want to let it out. You know, who's going to laugh at us? Who's going to talk about us? Oh, my God, what if they found out about that down at the church, you know? But if I can help somebody, no matter how grievous that is, it's well worth it to me. Well worth it to me. Today, I don't even think about that. I just do it. You want to hear what happened to me? I'm happy to tell you. But I want to be the one to tell you. You don't need to hear it from everybody else. So showing others not telling others, showing others. And that's what we do through this big book process. We show others who suffer how we were given the help is the very thing that makes our life seem so worthwhile to us now. How beautiful is that? Cling to this thought. Instead of the thoughts of self beating us down every day, cling to this thought that in God's hands, the dark past, no matter how dark it may be, that's the greatest possession that we now have. The key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for others. People say we have no power. You don't have any power to do this. You don't have any power to do that. Sound like I got a whole lot of it right there. If I cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession I have, the key to that is life and happiness for others. It says with it, you can avert. That sounds like I've been given some power in order to recover and help others, avert death and misery. So it is possible to dig up past misdeeds so they become a blight. I didn't even know what that meant for a long time. Spoiled or damageable. That's what a blight is. A blight and a veritable plague. We know what the plague is. A lot of us have been through that. For example, we know of situations in which the alcoholic or his wife have had love affairs. Oh my God. Anybody guilty of that other than me? In the first flush of spiritual experience, they forgave each other and drew closer together. Now look how the self comes right back in. It'll come right back in on top of this experience if we're not watching and we're not close and we're not doing what we do here. The miracle of reconciliation was at hand. Oh, God is wonderful. The program, this is beautiful, this. All of a sudden, something happens. We get into a fight. And then under one provocation or another, what am I provoked by? Her? No. By self, by a system of defeating thoughts. That's what I'm provoked by. So by one provocation of another, the aggrieved would unearth that old affair, of course, because now we've taken action based on that thought that we was provoked by. Now we're taking action. We're going to unearth that old affair and angrily cast its ashes about. If that happens, something was missed on page 67 of this book. And if you want to take a look at that and hold your place real quick, let's just run over there for a minute. And I know we've looked at this before. This is the prayer work we're going to do way back in our fourth step. And I have got to stay right here until pretty much forgiveness is there all around. Sometimes we're there for a long time. Though we did not like their symptoms, the way they disturbed us, they, like us, were sick too. I forget that part. They like ourselves. But we ask God to help us show them same tolerance, pity, patience. We cheerfully grant a sick friend when a person offended. Now, this is all the way back over there where we were at. I need to be practicing this daily. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. Most of the way down in the next paragraph, it says we cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant and look at this key word, view of each and every one. That's what we're looking to change, is our view. And whenever my view changes, my eyes open, the scales fall from it, the veil begins to lift. And I begin to see, I don't need to throw these ashes about anymore. The greatest thing is sitting right over here across from me that ever happened to me in my life. The one that I hurt the most in this world, trashed herself, everything. Forgive me in such a way. It's unbelievable. That has never come up again. And trust me, we've had disagreements. We've had arguments. We've had times when it was, not one time has that ever come back up again. That's a miracle, because I know a lot of people that's not the case. So I'm very, very, very grateful for this book, its contents, and more the application of it by her. It's been a miracle. It really has. The book says a few of us have had these growing pains, I think more than a few of us. And they hurt a great deal. They really do, because anytime we bring that old stuff back and drag it up and throw it into somebody's face, ain't nobody feels worse than what we did than some of us. If I don't see a lot of regret in a man whenever we get to some of the parts of this book that we go through, I began to take a close look at the relationship he and I are going to have going forward, because we have to have some remorse there. We just do. Husbands and wives have sometimes been obliged to separate for a time until a new perspective. That's what we're looking for here, right? A new perspective, one away from the self. New victory over hurt pride. We want to be rid of that. We want to get away from that. I can only do that by the experience of the Spirit, and now walking humbly with the grace of God and my brothers and sisters that are in recovery. Now, not everybody in the rooms are practicing a lot of this. By the grace of God, I've been able to sort out the ones who are and the ones that aren't, and I promise you, I go a different route whenever it comes to the ones that aren't. I love them. They're my brothers, whatever. They have nothing I want here. They have nothing I want. New victory over hurt pride could be re-won. In most cases, the alcoholics survive this ordeal without relapse, but not always. So we think that unless some good and useful purpose is to be served, past occurrences should not be discussed. Leave it alone. And that's a hard thing to do. But the more I practice it and I fail, and I get up and I practice it and I fail, and I get up and I fail, one day from the practice of it, I'm going to walk away from it the next time it happens. We families of alcoholics keep few skeletons in the closet. If we don't let this all out, I'm so grateful that I was exposed in step 9. I was exposed to everybody and everyone. I was in this process moving through it. I kept thinking, man, why isn't this working for me? Why isn't this working? I got into step 9. I got exposed. It's almost like I was completely stripped of everything. The more I tried to tell just a little bit and hide the rest of it kept coming out. And I was like, my God, is it ever going to end? And that's what she was saying too. Is it ever going to end? You know? And it ended. But if we keep those skeletons in the closet, then we haven't completely uncovered our past there. And for me, it didn't work. So everyone knows about the others' alcoholic troubles. This is a condition which in ordinary life would produce untold grief. There might be scandalous gossip, laughter at the expense of other people, and a tendency to take advantage of intimate information. Now, I found that happened to me inside of the rooms. Now, a lot of these people hadn't had a spiritual experience yet, and I was running around putting confidence in people that I shouldn't have been, even inside of the rooms. And I can tell you, for me, I learned that was a big mistake. There's some things that I need to keep under my hat and talk with just a few people, but I should be more focused on walking away from that behavior and being a new person, being a new being that this experience has to offer us all. Among us, it says these are rare occurrences. So we do talk about each other a great deal. We almost invariably temper such talk. Here's the key to it: by a spirit of love and tolerance. If I talk about Dennis, it's going to be about love. It's going to be about tolerance. I want to talk to you about what he does, not about what he did, not about what I think he ought to be doing. I want to talk to you about what he does, the service that he does, the people that he helps, the times that I've been able to call him one-on-one and he picks up the phone. You know, whenever I got to meet him in person here in Oklahoma, we gave each other a hug and we went all over the town, just burn up the town and had a great, I want to talk about those things, about a spirit of love and tolerance, because that's what we have between each other. And not only just me and him, there's several on this call that way. Well, let me read one more paragraph and I'll shut it down here. So another principle we observe carefully, and man, anytime it says we observe something carefully as far as a principle, I want to pay attention, is that we do not relate the intimate experiences of another person. Now, this would go for the people that I work with. I don't need to be talking about one sponsee to another. You know, I can remember telling my sponsor, I don't know how many guys you got in Oklahoma that's working this and this, but I feel like I'm doing. He said, you don't need to worry about how many people I'm working with in Oklahoma. There's only one guy in Oklahoma you need to be worried about that I'm working with, and that's you, buddy. No one else. And he shut that off right there. And so, you know, we don't do that unless we're sure that he would approve. We find it better when we're possible to stick to our own stories. It's a little harder to tell you about me than about them. A man may criticize or laugh at himself and it'll affect others favorably, but criticism or ridicule coming from another often produces the contrary effect. Members of a family should watch such matters carefully. Anytime I see those words, I want to try to practice that. For one careless, inconsiderate remark has been known to raise the very devil. We alcoholics, and especially we sex addicts, are sensitive people, really are. And it takes a long time for some of us, not all of us, but for some of us to outgrow that serious handicap. And, so I'm grateful that you guys have been here with me all this time studying the book. I always like to say I'm not the guru. If your sponsor tells you something different, he's right. I'm not. I'm really grateful to be here for you guys because it helps me as much, if not more than it has any of you. So thank you for letting me share tonight. I'm glad to be here.
This concludes David's share on tonight's chapter, but we encourage you to keep listening as he answers questions from the audience and shares additional experience, strength, and hope.
Since you opened up a little page 67, I'd like to refer back to that on the sick man's prayer. And you had mentioned something that has been kind of how I've been doing this with sponsees for a while now, and that's that until the other person in the resentment is forgiven, or at least let off the hook, I suggest and almost insist that they not go into column 4. Because in column 4, it says putting out of our minds the wrongs. Well, the wrongs the others have done are not out of my minds if I haven't let it go yet. But you said something I just want a clarification on. Do you, when you're working with your sponsees, do you make sure that they've cleared all the names on their list? I've been kind of at the point where I'm saying there might be 5 or 6 people that you can't let go of. We're not going to do column 4 on them right now, but starting on column 4 on the ones that you've forgiven. So how have you tempered those instructions or those guidelines that they give us there? Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. Good to see you always, brother. For me, I go to that prayer that's in the back of the book on page 552. And in fact, that's probably one, when we have a little more time that we should break down, because there's some actions that she takes there that is really life-changing, and how all of that came about. We usually read the story and just read the prayer. But what I do is I have them to go to that prayer, and really the ones that they're not able to turn loose of, I really encourage them to use that to get free from those. And it's worked. I mean, it worked for me so many different times. And, I just know that the guy would really not let me move on into the turnarounds until that was done. And, I may not have completely been over a lot of them, but I mean, for the most part, a few of them, not a lot of them, but I'm so glad that I took that time and that I've done that deep prayer work for that, because once I got in and really started looking at selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking, fear, and where was I to blame, those 5 questions on that page in the turnarounds. Oh my God. I started seeing, even while I've been writing inventory, my mind was feeding me a lie. There were some things that I was like, wait a minute, is that really true what I wrote? And of course it wasn't. And we discovered that in our 5th step. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. I make sure that they really try to chop out every name on that list before moving in, because if not, I'll go in with somewhat of a victim attitude and still feel like you've done something to me in some way or another. So that's just my experience. Thank you.
Sure. Just a clarification. I think I heard you say this, that we get the forgiveness complete on all the names on the list before moving in, because otherwise I'll still be in that spirit of unforgiveness. Even though I let go of it for Joe, A, B, and C person, I still got person D that I'm hanging on to. Is that what you're saying there?
Yes, sir. Let's go to 551. Let's start there. We'll go to the second to the last paragraph. And this is what I have them do, Jason. And so it says the resentment was against my mother. Boy, I can relate to this already. It was 25 years old and I had fed it. That capital I for me is the self. Self had been feeding it. I'd been buying into it. It fanned it. It nourished it. Like a delicate child, it had become such a part of me as my breathing, as much a part of me. It had provided me with excuses for my lack of education, material failures, yada, yada, yada. So last paragraph. One morning, however, I realized, and anytime I see those two words, I realize, suddenly it's almost like spirit has broken through. I had to get rid of it. Now, how would I realize that? If you read the upper paragraph right there, she's eat up with it. And if I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk, and I didn't want to get drunk anymore. So in my prayers that morning, first thing she did, she took action. She realized first. It's kind of like spotting the thought in step 10. We spot it. And then it says, in my prayers that morning, I asked God, there's a prayer, to point out some way for me to be free of the resentment. So during the day, a friend of mine brought to me some magazines to take to a hospital group. So she realizes first, she goes to prayer next. Now she's going to do some service work by taking magazines to a hospital. That's service work. Anytime I see that, I was interested in. I looked through them, and a banner across a feature of one of the articles by a prominent clergyman, which I caught the word resentment. Amazing how we realize something. We go to prayer with it. We do some sort of service to try to get away from self. And the next thing you know, the answer to that is almost like right in our hands. And that's how it was for her. He said, in effect, if you have a resentment and you want to be free of it, that's got to be the first question there. It's not that I have it, but do I want to be free of it? So if you'll pray for the person or thing that you resent, you will be free. That's a promise. That's not, if you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you'll be free. And I love this, especially this for me. Even when you don't really want it for them, your prayers are only words and you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. Those last 5 or 6 names that's on that list, I probably have no forgiveness for them at all. None. I've gotten a little better attitude, but it's not over yet by far. But it's telling me here it doesn't matter, even if these are only words. And I don't mean it, do it anyway. Do it every day for 2 weeks, and you will find that you have come to mean it and you will want it for them. How will I come to know that? Because Spirit will begin to do for me what I couldn't do for myself, because I realized, I asked in prayer, I did service, I took action on that with more prayer. And the next thing you know, I'm going to break free. I guarantee this works every time. It always has for me and everybody I work with that did it. Now, most people, they'll get some relief in 2 or 3 days and quit doing it. I'm like, this is a 14-day prayer. This is called the 25-year resentment prayer as far as I'm concerned. And you will find you've come to mean it for them, and you will realize. Remember, in the spiritual experience, it says we will suddenly realize. But look what he says, you will realize where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred. Now, that was all self. Look what's taken its place with Spirit, compassionate, understanding, and love. It worked for me then. It's worked for me many times since, and it'll still work for me every time. Keywords right here, the next 6 words. I'm willing to work. So thanks.
I was thinking the same lines as Jason has. And on page 66, it tells me that for when harboring such feelings, and we're talking about resentments, right in the middle of the page, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of lust returns and we drink again, and with us, to drink is to die. See why it's so important for me to do those prayer work before I go into that 4th column is because I'm getting ready to ask God to show me that my mistakes. And if self is in play, if I'm blocked off from the sunlight of the Spirit, I won't be able to see that. I'll make up all kinds of excuses. I'll still believe that they're the ones that had caused this. But once I do that prayer work and I feel nothing but love and forgiveness for them, never to be brought up or charged again, then I can actually go into the 4th column, into those turnarounds, and ask God to show me my mistakes. Where had I been selfish, inconsiderate, dishonest, and afraid? And it's amazing what God will show when I do that. We start writing all that out. When I went through it with David, and when we went through it in our 5th step, I wouldn't have believed it, but I'm the one that wrote that, and God was the one that gave it to me. He showed me and the depths inside of me. I could see that all those people who were once my perpetrators, I could see clearly now that they were actually my victims of the false narratives and false reality that self had been giving me. So I absolutely have to have those resentments removed by doing that prayer work so that I'm not blocked off from the sunlight of spirit and God can work fully. Remember, we didn't say amen at the end of that third step prayer, and we're in prayer all the way through these inventories so that God can show us and help us look inside and see what's been blocking us and what's the defects that have been hurting other people and how self has been acting. The difficult part about going through all that prayer work before we go into the turnarounds is that it gave me really good prayer tools that I can use even today that I didn't have before coming into this program, where if I have a resentment where a 10th step just doesn't quite get it, I can go in and start doing that prayer work from that 4th step, and it is so powerful. When I first came into this program and I looked back when I came in, I was like on day 4, and I had finally, after 40 years of drinking and drugging and sexaholism, and man, I had hurt a lot of people in my life, and it really went into some dark areas. And I remember laying there one night thinking, good God, I just couldn't really face all this. And I thought about, I had a gun under my bed, and I thought, I should just end it right here. And I remember an old timer told me, he had me go to page 124, and he had me read these 2 paragraphs, but what I had underlined, and really, it gave me hope. Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. That was just enough hope for me to just take the next step and keep working these steps. And I'm so glad I did, because, man, that's been true. I've been able to other people who've been down the paths I've been down and help them find freedom, and that God can actually use those stories to bring us out of darkness.
I remember that experience was a very beautiful moment whenever the truth about the lie was revealed. It's beautiful when we see that. And all of a sudden we know, that we don't have to live that way anymore. With it, you can avert death and misery for others. Wow. Yeah. People that tell me you don't have any power to do this, I was given power a long time ago, way back in step 3. And, what I do with that power will determine the outcome of my reality. But, we most definitely get power back here. We do. I mean, we connect to the power. We're not the power, but we've been given the power to, help others to recover. One of my favorite sentences in the book, of course, I say that about every page, right? I mean, you guys probably caught on to that by now, but it's on page 132 there. And it's the last sentence before the very last paragraph on the page on 132. It says, we have recovered and have been given the power to help others. That's a gift. And it's a gift I cherish very dearly. So I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for a great discussion. Glad to be here.